Okay, so Luke chapter 22, we're going to pick up in verse 63. To be perfectly honest, I am much more comfortable talking about Jesus's crucifixion than I am just reading the story. I don't know why that is. I've always struggled with that part of the Gospels. That maybe because emotionally it's harder to read and to read the details of it than it is to sort of talk about it theologically. It sort of keeps it at a distance. But the interesting thing, of course, is that Luke doesn't do that. Luke doesn't spend a lot of time being explicitly theological about Jesus's sacrifice. He apparently wanted his readers to just experience that, just to let that wash over us and touch us as it will. And so, I think I want to spend just some time just reading tonight this section of Luke. We can maybe take some turns in reading and make some comments as we go. But I think the main thing in what's coming, especially as we get to the crucifixion itself, is just to kind of let it have its way with you and let it do with you what it will. And I think that's kind of what all the gospel writers want to do with his death. Paul reflects theologically on it, and it's good that he does. We need that, but we also perhaps need just to sort of see this embodied love and sacrifice that Jesus is for us in these moments, and let that have its effects on us. I think about John in 1 John saying, this is love, not that we love God, but that He loved us, right? That He in this way, that He gave Himself in this way as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. We're supposed to experience these moments, I think, as signs of God's great love for us, and so. So that said, let's jump into some reading, starting in verse 63. The men who were guarding Jesus began mocking and beating him. They blindfolded him and demanded, "Prophesy, who hit you?" And they said many other insulting things to him. At daybreak, the council of the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the teachers of the law, met together, and Jesus was led before them. "If you are the Messiah," they said, "tell us." Jesus answered, "If I tell you, you will not believe me. And if I asked you, you would not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God." They all asked, "Are you then the Son of God?" He replied, "You say that I am." Then they said, "Why do we need any more testimony? We have heard it from his own lips." And we can pause there just for a moment. What are your thoughts as we read these verses?
Well, it's like they really didn't really care what he answered, because they had already made up their minds. In 67, it said, "If you are the Christ, tell us." And if he had come right out and said, "Yes, I am," they wouldn't have believed, because in 71 they condemned him. So they already knew what their reaction was going to be. So you wonder why. I guess they had to have, they looked at that as maybe evidence that they could present that, oh yeah, this man is blaspheming or whatever.
They need to have a reason to ask what they're going to ask for. And this provides reason.
That's a good point, though. It's a sham trial, so why have it at all? They could just go in front of Pilate and say they had one. He wouldn't know the difference because he's not there.
For one thing, I mean,
maybe they feel bad about outright lying.
Well, yeah, that's that's very true. There were specific laws in the law of Moses, right, about how to, about what a judicial situation should look like, and I think they're trying to go through the form of it, right, if not the actual content of it, and the way the gospel presents it, some probably believed that he was really what they said he was. Some probably had that belief. I mean, this is a council of people, right? Probably not everybody is specifically on the same page, but there are enough on the same page that they seem to be, like you say, kind of trying to get to a particular outcome.
This is a judicial proceeding, and he doesn't let them control it.
Yeah.
Normally, the court or the questioners are in control of it, but he makes affirmations, he says what he wants. So he's taking control in the sense of the deposition or the examination.
Yeah, according to Jesus, I don't think the trial really matters. It's a matter of course, it's gonna happen, and their opinion doesn't matter either. He says, I tell you, you will not believe me. What's their opinion? It's worthless.
Jesus is able to maintain some degree of himself or personhood during the trial, but those few verses about the guards, that's just despicable.
Yeah.
Because Jesus is helpless in that situation. He can't hit back. And these people are supposed to be guarding him.
Right. And keep in mind, too, these are Jewish guards, right? These are not the Romans that were known for this kind of cruelty. These are his countrymen who the temple police, the temple guards, who are the first to do this. I interrupted. Please go on.
Well, it just so happened that Christy and I were down at the Art Institute the last weekend, and Manet, not Monet, Manet, has a very large painting of the guards surrounding Jesus. And the interesting commentary about that painting is that Manet painted the guards to look like ordinary people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, whenever you get to a passage like this, it's very easy to say, oh, it was the guards. But in fact, it's not just probably the guards. In some sense, Jesus may still be mocked and derided and the like today. It's very easy to beat up on him still. Anyway.
The art historian actually commented that prior to Manet's, most of the art done of this scene showed Jesus as a beautiful and good figure, and the guards as evil and, I don't know if she said ugly, but evil looking people. And Manet did it very differently. Jesus looks good, but not beautiful, just ordinary. And the guards look ordinary, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
Mark has well, after these guys beat him up, Mark has another note that in his gospels that the assistants of the high priest take over. They beat him up too. So I mean, it's not that's there and that's there.
Yep, that's right. That's right. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody joins in, right? Sorry.
The idea that he's seated at the right hand of the power of God and Son of God, and they understood exactly what he said. Okay.
Yeah, his comment is his answer, the answer that he gives, such as it is from Son of Man, probably from Daniel 7, and then Psalm 110, the promise God makes to the king, which was taken as a messianic prophecy, that you will sit at my right hand and I'll make your enemies a footstool for your feet. And it's an interesting way that, interesting quote to use, interesting comment that Jesus makes, because he's saying, if he's talking about Daniel 7, the Son of Man in Daniel 7, he's the one who receives all the authority of all the kingdoms when God strips them away from the powers that be. So that's quite a statement to make when you're on trial in front of the powers that be. And then also Psalm 110, I'll sit at my right hand and I'll make your enemies a footstool for your feet. And it's an affirmation of Ron, you mentioned keeping some sense of yourself. It's an affirmation of what Jesus knows about himself and who he knows he is, and it's an affirmation of God's faithfulness, that Jesus is trusting even at this moment in God's faithfulness to vindicate him and to raise him up. And it's striking that you can to have that faith at this moment, right? To have that trust and that conviction at this moment that God is at work, God is acting, and that this isn't what it seems like. This is not going to end the way it seems it's going to. But that is enough for them. Son of God, some people think he's affirming divinity, or they're asking about his divinity. Are you claiming to be divine? It's just as much of a problem for Jesus if he's claiming to be the king from the Psalms that is thought of as the Son of God, the Messiah who God adopts as his son, because in the covenant, because in that sense he's saying he's a king, and that's really what the Jewish people are trying to get him to say. Because the Romans don't care, right, about an argument about divinity, an argument about their religion. What the Romans care about is, he says he's king. And there are lots of pretenders who have came along in the Roman Empire claiming to be kings, and Rome had a way of dealing with those people. And so that's kind of what they're driving at, I think. And that's then the charge they make, beginning in verse 1 of chapter 23. Someone want to read a little bit? Read through about verse 5.
Then the whole group got up and led Jesus off to Pilate. They began to bring charges against Jesus. They said, "We have found this man misleading our people. He is against paying taxes to Caesar, and he claims to be the Christ, a king." So Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Yes, it is just as you say," Jesus replied. Then Pilate spoke to the chief priests and the crowd. He announced, "I find no basis for a charge against this man." But they kept it up. They said, "This teaching stirs up the people all over Judea. He started in Galilee and has come all the way here."
So they're claiming he said he's a king. Pilate asked him, "Are you a king?" And he answers sort of cryptically, "You have said so." I think it's a way of sort of saying, that's your take on it, but it doesn't mean what you think it means, or something along those lines. It's a way of sort of he's not backing away from it, right? He's not trying to weasel out of it. He's just, he's not ready to own Pilate's definition of what this would be, I suppose. But he doesn't say no either. You have said so. And Pilate, for whatever reason, finds no basis for a charge. I wonder if it's because, what is this? What does he look like by this point? What condition is he in by this point? Who are his followers? Where's his army? Where's his? His followers have all scattered. He's not reading some manifesto. He's not ready to march on the Capitol. He doesn't find a basis, but they insist. But then Pilate gets a way out, right? What's his way out? He thinks he doesn't have to deal with this because
He's a Galilean.
he's from Galilee.
And that's not Pilate's area of jurisdiction.
That's Herod. Galilee is Herod. That's the sticks. Galilee wasn't as much the sticks as we sometimes talk
You
about.
see how Luke is spreading this geographically.
Exactly.
Okay? He's spreading
Exactly.
it geographically, not just, like Jerusalem, but trying to broaden it out geographically, include Galilee with the high.
Everybody's in on this, right?
everything.
Everybody's a part of this.
Yeah.
And everybody's sort of getting their call out in a way they probably don't want. So he hears that he's under Herod's jurisdiction, so he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at this time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased because for this would, by the way, this would have been the son of Herod the Great. I always have to think about it. This would have been Herod the Great's son.
Yeah.
Herod that was on the throne when Jesus was born. This would have been his son, who had inherited that part of his realm, or not inherited it, received it from Rome. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. This is sort of like the rich guy who, he just wants to be entertained. He's not that interested in the politics of it all. He just sees this guy that everybody's been talking about and thinks maybe he'll do a trick for me. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there, vehemently accusing. Isaiah 53, right? He was did not open his mouth despite the accusations, despite the condemnation. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him. Dressing him in an elegant robe, they sent him back to Pilate. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Before this, they had been enemies. I don't really know why Luke mentions that other than just for historical interest, but Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who is inciting the people to rebellion. I have examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him. Neither is Herod, for he sent him back to us, as you can see. He has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will punish him and then release him." But the whole crowd shouted, "Away with this man. Release Barabbas to us." Barabbas had been thrown into prison for an insurrection in the city and for murder. Anybody notice that? That's interesting. They're claiming Jesus essentially is leading an insurrection. They got a guy in custody who really did lead an insurrection, and they want him released. Let him go and take Jesus instead.
I would have thought they would have killed him a long time ago.
Barabbas?
Put him to death.
He was, maybe he was waiting for his turn. I don't know. I'm not sure. But yeah, he was, maybe his case was still pending in some way, but I don't think generally
And
when.
the priests, chief priests and the rest of them, I mean, they're no good either. I mean, like, they murderers too. Anointed.
That's why Luke make sure we understand that Jesus did nothing wrong. It's very clear. The whole thing is cockeyed.
One of the interesting things about Luke, the gospel, and about Acts is he's got a real special interest in Jesus and then the church, the Christians, standing before Gentile rulers and not being guilty of anything, right? They're being brought by Jewish opponents. They're being brought to these people in power in all these cities, all these places, and they find nothing against it. And Luke has got a real interest in that, and you see that in this gospel here, and you see it also in Acts. It's just sort of an interest of his, I think. Other thoughts?
We begin to see Pilate as he is. First, he wants to release Jesus. Now, after further pressure, he's innocent, but I'll punish him and then release him.
Yeah.
We'll give him strokes.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe the feeling is, I think the feeling tended to be, if you come before the procurator like this, that in itself is a crime. You've been brought here, so you've obviously done something wrong. So you need to get a little reminder of Rome's power. It's probably the thinking here that he's not guilty of insurrection, but he's created enough of a problem for me and for the city and for the area that he probably needs a little reminder of Rome's power. Justice was not a big deal, right? It was order, it was peace. You were in prison because they were waiting to. Prison wasn't the punishment. You were generally in prison because they were waiting to decide on your punishment. And so, somebody want to make a comment?
3 times it's mentioned he finds no guilt. And 2 times he says, what the heck was it? I will punish him. Like,
There were rules about how the Romans had rules about the ways these punishments were administered. It was the 40 minus 1.
39.
Yeah, I think it was 40 lashes minus 1. There were you could beat them pretty severely, but even there was the scourge that had the metal in it that everybody knows about. That I think that was generally used though on the way it was used on Jesus as
almost killed
on a death on a person who was sentenced to death.
Do we know if this is the people versus the council?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Then they all shouted out together away with this fellow release.
It's that the crowd, he says, but the crowd is, I think, sort of defined in verse 13. He called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people. What other people besides the chief priests and the rulers are certainly there, and some other people that obviously it's not the whole city, but it's probably maybe a group of people who were close by who are called in to be witnesses of what's happening, or I'm not sure. I don't know that we know. Certainly some of just the maybe rank and file other people besides the chief priests and the rulers. The council's certainly there. Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate appealed to them again, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him." For the 3rd time, he spoke to them. Why? What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore, I will have him punished and then release him. With loud shouts, they insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. So Pilate decided to grant their demand. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, the one they asked for, and surrendered Jesus to their will. Must have been quite confusing for Pilate. I think generally the insurrectionists have been pretty popular, had some pretty popular support, right? And suddenly they have a guy who's trying, who according to them is trying to overthrow Rome, and they all want him crucified. It must have been very puzzling. But eventually he just gives in, right? And gives Jesus up.
It shows Pilate's hypocrisy a little bit too, right? Having an innocent man punished. It's very hypocritical. It also shows how superficial he was as a leader. It didn't have much depth. It's clever, but not depth.
Well, and again, what's his responsibility?
Keep the peace.
Keep the peace, right?
The fact that you know, that he wasn't much of a leader, that wasn't his role. He wasn't
Well, he's in a
there
leadership
to
position.
lead, he's ruling over people.
That's a
who-
leadership position,
No,
not top leader.
when you are a leader, you want the people to look at you as, I suppose, an example, or, you know, someone that you think is worthy to follow. In this case, he wasn't sent there as a leader. He was sent there to rule over the people and enforce Rome's laws.
Keep them in line.
He didn't want the people looking up to him and thinking he's some great person. That wasn't his role.
No.
And Rome didn't expect him to be like that.
But just an interesting character, that's what I'm saying. He's clever, he's superficial, he's hypocritical.
No,
He
I
doesn't
don't-
care about religion, even though he's Jewish. He's got a Jewish background.
Pilate, not Pilate.
No, Herod.
Yeah, Herod, this is
Herod's
Pilate.
not a Jewish background.
Yeah, Herod does, Herod does. This is Pilate. Yeah.
I'm talking about Herod.
Yeah.
But,
They seem like consummate politicians to me.
Yeah.
They tend to bow to the group that's screaming the loudest in the name of keeping whatever order there is.
Pilate's job is to keep order. This is gonna keep order, really.
It was right before the king. It was right, I mean, it was right before the king to change the money.
As long as they pay the taxes and keep quiet.
Right, right. Did, Jacob, did you? I thought Jacob said something, but maybe maybe so, maybe so. What do you think of Luke's telling of the Barabbas story? Is it, I mean, it's gotta be intentional, right, that the guilty person set free while the innocent, because the innocent man is going to suffer? I mean, I think that's us, right? I think we're supposed to sort of see ourselves in Barabbas' experience, that he's freed because Jesus dies, and without that, he dies. And so I think that's, I think we're supposed to sort of, not that we admire Barabbas, of course, but I think we're supposed to see a parallel to, this is Luke talking about the value of Jesus, or what Jesus's death accomplishes, what it does in some sense, that he doesn't like get explicit about it again. He wants us to see this thing.
Well, there's also going to be a bit of a narrative contrast because there's going to be two more guilty people
Right?
that are going to come up in the narrative.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler.
The reason I asked that question, I used to always kind of envision, and I think that might be because it was drawn this way and stuff, that, when Jesus approached Jerusalem, everyone was putting down their garments and welcoming the regular folks, right? The regular people. And it always, even as a kid, it puzzled me. What happened that now the crowd is saying, crucify him? And I'm starting to think that this is a select group of loudmouths that have been, and that the whole aspect of this is manipulation for getting the answer getting the justification, not necessarily. If you did a vote, I'm not sure this would be the outcome. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
It's interesting that as Pilate is sort of waffling about what he's going to do, suddenly you got this crowd yelling a lot, right? That perhaps you're right, that the leaders sort of recruited some folks. We need to make some noise so that Pilate feels pressure to do what we want him to do.
I've sometimes been very rarely, but I've sometimes been in a situation where a group of people is deciding what they want the outcome to be of something. And then the next conversation is about okay, what could we say to get us there?
Mhm.
And it's basically a manipulation exercise, right?
Mhm.
We're
Yeah.
we're not taking the evidence and marching it through to get to a conclusion. We're picking the conclusion and then backtracking to manipulate the justification for it. And I think anytime we're doing that, we're manipulating people's minds. That's a major problem.
And if we can get enough people on board, right, maybe we'll have a chance. And that, I mean, that, yeah,
This is often how
It's
the-
fundamentally dishonest.
it is, it is. What's that?
This is most of the time how the legal system works. This is one of my big moments of disillusionment in law school. People hear the facts and have a result in mind, and they use the law to
Get there.
the result they want, to the extent that they can.
Yeah, yeah.
Or if they can't, they spend most of their opinion complaining about why the result they have to endorse is the wrong one.
Yeah.
In the hopes that somebody will see it and change it, but this is not unusual, it's just that the desired result is so unfair.
Yeah. I think I'm just gonna read through this next section straight through, and then we can go back and comment as we see fit. As the soldiers led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him, and made him carry it behind Jesus. A large number of people followed it, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you'll say, 'Blessed are the childless women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if people do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it's dry?" 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified it there, along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one." Soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above it, which read, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said, "since you're under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we're getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered him, "Truly I tell you, today you'll be with me in paradise." It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, for the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he had said this, he breathed his last. The centurion, seeing what had happened, praised God and said, "Surely this was a righteous man." When all the people who had gathered to witness this sight saw what took place, they beat their breasts and went away. But all those who knew him, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. So, thoughts, comments, what does this do to you as you're reading?
Seems pretty hopeless, doesn't it? It always seems so dark.
The mockery one after the other, just Luke tells just taking turns, mocking and making fun and trying to make things as bad as possible for it.
In a way, it's just as bad for some of the onlookers that know what's going on is wrong, but they feel they can't do anything. That would be a bad situation.
Yeah, you have verse 48, right? people who had gathered to witness, saw it and they, they knew it was bad at that point in time. Maybe some of the same ones who had been manipulated into saying crucify him are now, walking away from this scene just devastated.
There would have been more reaction with the miraculous signs that were going on, the darkness and the earthquake, the tearing of the veil, but it doesn't really say that. It says they just went away.
Excuse me, I had a question.
Mhm.
Where it says, Jesus said, today you'll be with me in paradise.
Mhm.
So when Jesus died, he went to the grave, right?
He went in some form to be with the Lord, to be with God. Paradise is a Persian loan word.
But did he spend, time in the grave before, because God raised him up. So,
In some form, spiritually or somehow, he went to be with God and assured felt he would go to be with God and assured this thief that he would be too.
This is one of the reasons that there's some evidence for the spiritual resurrection and bodily resurrection happening at different times. Is that maybe what had happened here?
Yeah, I don't. Luke doesn't really explain it other than to say, this was Jesus' assurance to this man. Today you'll be with me in paradise. You'll be with me in this. Basically, it's saying you'll be with me in the presence of God, receiving comfort and receiving peace.
He commends his spirit to the Father is the last thing that he does. So that implies it's not in the body anymore. Once the body is dead.
Yeah, that's a very Jewish way of thinking, right? A person is a body quickened by a spirit. And when those two are separated, it's not a person anymore in the sense that you think of, not a living soul, living being, a nephesh is the Old Testament word. And it's not the old Greek dichotomy of spirit versus flesh. For a Jewish person, that's what makes you up. You're both those things. That's why Christians expect a bodily resurrection, because that's who you are. That's how God made you, right? That's who you are. And so this is the separation of those two, and apparently in Jesus' thinking, the spirit goes to be with God. And again, we don't have an explanation for that. It's just the assurance that Jesus gives in this case. What about that thief?
Amazing, right?
Yeah.
Because this develops an understanding of how the world really is. Why did he do something mirroring crucifixion in the first place?
Remember me when you come into your kingdom. I mean, that shows some. It almost sounds like he's familiar with Jesus in some way, his teaching or something, because that kingdom is a big deal for Jesus, a big part of his teaching. But that expectation, right? That this kingdom is coming, and yeah, I want to be on the right side of the guy who's going to be in charge.
Well, it's also nailed on top of the cross.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. That's a good point. Yeah, maybe that's all he was reacting to was the notice on top of the cross.
It's too bad we don't have this reaction after Jesus' death. Presumably they're not dead yet.
And it's an interesting contrast, isn't it, with the soldiers? If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself. And the thief saying, when you come, remember me.
Jesus was pretty famous, so I mean, he may have heard about him running around, and okay, hear Jesus' teaching, so it's not that far-fetched.
Certainly possible.
Luke provides us with 3 of the 7 words of Jesus on the cross, unique. No other gospel has them.
That's right. That's right. They are, Father, forgive them.
Forgiveness, salvation, and reunion. The
Truly, I
first,
tell you, you'll
traditionally-
be in paradise, and Father, into your hands I commit my spirit.
traditionally the first, second, and last words.
Yes. Yes. And when harmonized with the other gospels.
When I read about the thieves, it reminds me that I only have a small understanding of God's way of doing things. Because
How so?
well, somehow, despite being, a thief and so forth, Jesus has said that this fellow will, by recognizing, maybe not completely understanding, but recognizing to some extent who Jesus was and saying, I got nothing here, right? I mean, that gets him to be with God somehow. It's not our usual way of doing things, but.
There's a line from Romans, I was just looking at it, I can't remember the reference now. But Paul talks about God who justifies the wicked, which is a lovely line when you are feeling kind of wicked. It's a lovely reminder of the business God is in, right? In reference to his children's failures and saying God is a God who justifies the wicked. God is a God.
When I look at this in 39 to about 42-ish, I just think that the thief there, well, this one thief demonstrates his faith.
Yes.
Right, that's what I was thinking. At least he understands. He said he's being punished justly. That's why he was telling the other person that was throwing insult. He says, we're being punished justly. This man is not. He understood. So he must have knew or had heard the teaching of Christ. Because why would he have that understanding otherwise? No one else did.
Colette, did you have something more?
I was just thinking his faith is demonstrated in his words, like verse 42, right? He says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And that kind of like what Christy's saying, and mate, that's an odd request when that's not how we do things, in a simple ask. But it has to come from faith, right? Our actions demonstrate our faith. And he's asking to be with God. And I find that amazing that he's believing this.
Well, yeah, I agree with all of that, but on the other hand, we're starting to maybe suggest that faith, trying to normalize this, and it's really hardly there long enough to constitute what we normally think of as faith. I mean, it's almost an instantaneous profession of belief or hope, even.
It's faith as much as a mustard seed.
Well, but I mean, normally we try to make faith deeper. That's faith is with acts and all. The impressive thing about this is how much it goes against that, what you need to do to be saved. Not much here.
That was my point, actually, that it's not our normal way of doing things.
And it's also the point that faith is so simple. We put a market on faith. We say what it should be, how big, how little, when, where, what. But this certainly is, in my mind, an act of faith to even request it. You got to believe that it can happen, be it a knee-jerk response or a quickness, and I'm almost out of here, so I'm gonna ask this guy who's done nothing wrong, take me with you, because you, it's remarkable to me.
I mean, we tend to, sort of look down on deathbed confessions and, things like that. But, it's not to say they're never valid, right? They're never sincere, they're never honest. And I think faith, for all of us is a very, it's, I don't know if this communicates, it's contextual, right? Faith in a moment, faith in whatever moment we're in. And this thief is in a bad moment in his life. And so this is faith for him. This is his trust in the one who can do what he can't do. I think that ought to be our standard way of thinking of faith. I think that ought to be the way we think of faith most of the time. And again, God is the God who justifies the wicked and who goes to great lengths to save and to rescue and to heal and to do that for sinners. And
I think it's sort of interesting how wistful his request is. I mean, he doesn't request salvation. He doesn't request request forgiveness. It's just remember me, whatever that is. And it's enough.
It sounds like a psalm, doesn't it? Remember your servant.
I actually, as I was reading through this, I thought of all of the things that we have Kyrie eleison. There's other things that people say to Jesus that we have picked up on, but I don't recall people actually picking up on this plea to Jesus, despite the fact it was very effective. I mean, no, I don't think so.
I can't, nothing's coming to mind right off the top of my head, but I surely there's some song somewhere that that asks God to remember me.
It seems to me this would be a great prayer.
Yeah,
remember me now that you're in your kingdom.
Right.
Right? Remember me.
It's in a song, but it's quoting Jesus at the Last Supper.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I do remember that. Yeah.
I can't think of one that quotes the thief. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we've always had trouble with the thief. The thief makes us uncomfortable.
Sometimes.
I think the thief is supposed to make us a little uncomfortable.
I've always been thankful for the thief. Who just asked for this one little favor.
In the other gospels, he's with the other criminal. He's insulting Jesus.
Yes.
But as time goes on, Jesus does nothing back at him. And so so he concludes that Jesus is innocent. He doesn't fight back at the insults that are given to him. I mean, he can see the Jewish people coming up to the cross, insulting Christ and spitting. Okay, the damage that was done to his body. We have this idea that, you guys are talking about the painting. Jesus looked really nice. Well, I mean, you get beat up for the whole day and dragged all over the place, and scourged. I don't know how he was scourged. Some people make a big deal about the scourging, like saying, oh, well, there was bone and there was glass and the whip. We don't know that. We don't know how many times, man, he got hit either. So I'm sure he wasn't a pretty sight, and I'm sure, he could have insulted the people back or whatever he wanted to, but he took it. Not like me.
I have, all of these, him going before all these kings and stuff, was that in one day?
Yes.
It doesn't seem like he got any rest.
No, no, he was up all night and praying and then rested, and then it's that next day is when all this, you know, from the time he's arrested in the middle of the night.
They got him going back and
Yeah.
forth. Oh, wow.
Herod happened to be in Jerusalem from the Passover. We know that from one of the other gospels. And what was Luke saying? Anyway, somebody. And so he's back and forth between Pilate and between the council and Pilate and Herod and Pilate and then eventually the cross.
They
Well, and he
call-
actually ends up dying quite quickly.
He does.
Probably.
He does. It's about
Because
6
probably,
hours.
probably because of the pre-crucifixion treatment that he had. Because accounts say people could linger on a cross for,
Couple days.
yeah, it was not good. But and there, the Jews are on a timetable, as we'll find out, because they need them down they need it down before the Sabbath starts that evening. So.
I don't know, it seemed like, was it anything about them breaking bones?
Yes, one of the gospel writers talks about breaking the bones of the others who hadn't died yet. So you could push yourself up with your legs. Apparently, you could push yourself up with your legs to get a breath. And if your legs are broken, guess what? You can't do that anymore. So you're going to suffocate. So,
John's the one who mentioned
I was thinking it was John Goey because John makes a big deal about his bones weren't broken.
the Lamb of God.
So actually, we're picking up probably on a mistranslation from Paul when we talk about Jesus's body broken on the cross. It's not broken, actually, in the sense of bones
bone.
being broken, because actually that's a point in one of the Gospels that Jesus's bones aren't broken. So that's a little bit of common saying that we may want to reformulate.
Well, I just wanted to touch on, just before we go, the words in verse 34, forgive them for they don't know what they're doing. Jesus' great compassion and forgiveness, even against those who hurt him, and this magnanimity, right? That he's willing to say, willing to ask for their forgiveness because they don't get it. They don't know. They don't know what this is. They don't know what's happening. And I just think God must forgive me very often because I don't know what I'm doing. I suspect some of you are the same. And then Jesus' trust at the end, into your hands I commit my spirit. As we deal with realities of life like death, to commit ourselves to God, to commit, to give Him our trust, and to put our fate in His hands. It's Jesus' example for us. Next week we will pick up with Jesus' burial and resurrection. And we'll pick up in verse 50.